At Aero 406, on the gray morning of May 31st, 1944, the crew of USS England had that sick, familiar feeling that every anti-submarine sailor learned to hate. Another attack run. Another perfect approach. Another salvo of Hedgehog bombs sailing out ahead. Another. Nothing. No explosions. No oil. No wreckage. No satisfaction. Just the same steady ping of the sonar and the same thin pencil line on the plot, sliding away under them into the dark. For the better part of 12 hours, they had been stalking one Japanese submarine in a patch of ocean north of the Admiralty Islands. They'd attacked her again and again, by 12 separate Hedgehog patterns of contact-fused bombs, by turns from England, Raby, and George, by the old standby of depth charges when frustration bubbled up. And still she was alive. Most Japanese skippers by this point in the war had no illusions about Allied anti-submarine warfare. They knew the odds, knew how many U-boats had died in the Atlantic. But on this day, RO-105's captain, whether by skill, luck, or sheer stubbornness, had done what his comrades on 6 other boats in the same patrol line had failed to do: survive long enough to make the hunters doubt themselves. On England's bridge, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton scanned the horizon through his binoculars and felt his jaw clench. They'd sunk I-16. They'd sunk RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108. 5 submarines in less than 2 weeks. They weren't about to let this one get away. Down in the sonar shack, the operator called out again. "Contact bearing 065, range 1,200 yards, sir. Seems to be turning slowly to starboard. Still about 2 knots. Pendleton exhaled. "All right," he said quietly. "We go again. Come left. Match him. Stand by Hedgehog." The coxswain answered, wheel turning. The destroyer Escort began her tight turn, nose swinging toward an invisible speck a couple of football fields away under the surface. On the forecastle, the crew of the Hedgehog mount stood ready at their posts around the 24 stubby spigots arranged in a tight oval. The weapons waited. Tubular projectiles, each about 5 inches across and a few feet long, each with enough torpex in its nose to rip open a steel pressure hull if they made contact. There would be no great thunder from these. They'd fly out 200 yards and slip into the sea almost quietly. If they missed, nothing would happen. No depth charge geysers, no telling pressure wave. If they hit, the sub would die. In the after chart room, one of the junior officers ran a thumb along the margin of the plotting sheet where someone had scrawled a single number and circled it. 5. 5 confirmed submarine kills. In 12 days, one small destroyer Escort had already destroyed more enemy subs than most wartime navies ever would. If they could finish RO-105, they'd be writing a record nobody in Tokyo or Washington was ready for. Pendleton checked his TDC, listened to the sonar cadence, and made his choice. Fire! 24 stubby cylinders left the launcher with a barely audible whump, tracing high arcs before disappearing into the sea ahead. The men waited. Silence. Then, 40 seconds later, a series of sharp, concussive cracks shuddered up through England's bow. Not 1 or 2, but several, clustered close in time. The ship rocked. There was a pause, a heartbeat of stillness. Then, from somewhere below, a different kind of detonation rolled through the water. A deeper, more gut-level thump as something big, ballast tanks, air flasks, maybe a torpedo warhead, let go. Up on the bridge, Pendleton looked at the expanding boil of oil and wreckage that surfaced minutes later and finally let himself breathe. RO-105 was gone. 6 submarines in 12 days. Back in Japan, no one would believe that a single 300-foot Escort, 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer and half as glamorous, had just done what they'd assumed only carrier task forces or entire hunter groups could manage. In Washington, Even the U.S. Navy's own brass took a moment to absorb the patrol reports. Then Admiral Ernest King, the notoriously prickly chief of naval operations, smiled wryly and said the line that would follow England forever. "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy." That moment in late May was the climax. To get there, you have to wind the clock back 12 days, and a little further, to a friend Pendleton had never met, and to a class of weapons that were supposed to be the future of anti-submarine warfare, and that nobody quite trusted yet. Throughout the First and Second World Wars, one number haunted every escort captain's dreams: the hit probability of a depth charge attack. In Royal Navy and USN reports, it came down to this: tens of thousands of cans rolled off the stern, thousands of attack patterns laid, dozens of submarines actually killed. The British kept meticulous records. By 1943, they'd launched 5,174 depth charge attacks. Confirmed kills, 85. That worked out to roughly one sunk submarine for every 60 attacks. You could improve your odds with better sonar, better ahead-throwing weapons like squid and mousetrap, better training. But the basic problem refused to go away. Depth charges were a guess. You set a hydrostatic fuse on a canister, rolled it off the stern, or fired it from a K-gun, and by the time it dropped to whatever depth you'd guessed the sub might be at, she'd almost always moved. Even when you were roughly on target, those great deafening thumps that escort crews loved so much were double-edged. The shockwave blanked your ass stick, early sonar, for up to 15 minutes. You had no idea whether you'd actually hurt the enemy until you either saw proof on the surface or picked him up again downrange. In the Atlantic, British and Canadian escorts learned to live with that reality. In the Pacific, where distances were larger and contacts rarer, every lost opportunity was more painful. Somebody had to come up with something that didn't rely on rolling explosives blindly into the wake of a sonar contact and praying. Ironically, the solution that USS England carried on her bow in 1944 had come from across the Atlantic. The British called it Hedgehog. The theory behind Hedgehog was simple and brutal. Instead of throwing a depth charge pattern into where a sub had been, throw a ring directly into where he was about to be. Take your sonar contact. Maintain it. Align your bow directly on the bearing. Compute the sub's depth and closing speed. Then fire an elliptical pattern of contact-fused bombs 200 yards ahead of the ship. The projectiles flew, arced, and entered the water in a tight spread that, if your solution was even close, would surround the submarine's predicted position in 3 dimensions. No more guessing at depth. No more waiting for time charges. No more blindness if you missed. Each Hedgehog bomb was only deadly if it physically struck something solid. No hit, no bang. From the escort commander's point of view, that was frustrating. From the mathematician's point of view, it was a gift. If you got no explosions, you knew your pattern had entirely missed. If you got one or more sharp detonations, you knew you'd made solid contact. And crucially, the water stayed quiet enough between those small, localized blasts that your sonar picture never completely went away. You could keep correcting, keep walking your patterns in. On early trials, Royal Navy ships using Hedgehog saw their effective kill rates jump dramatically. 1 kill for every 4 to 8 attacks under good conditions, compared to that depressing 1 in 60 with depth charges. The U.S. Navy fitted the system to new destroyer escorts and some older destroyers, but adoption was spotty. Many captains didn't like it. It didn't feel like they were attacking. It lacked the visceral, morale-pleasing thunder of a full 10 or 20 charge pattern going off under the stern. Even in the Pacific, there were salty old hands who referred to it as the porcupine on the bow and relied on it only as a supplement to their K-guns and racks. One man who paid attention to the numbers more than the noise was a ComSub PAC staffer turned escort planner, Hamilton Haynes. Another was a quiet, methodical officer named Walton Pendleton. And above both of them, in Pearl Harbor, was Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood. Lockwood's war had started with men like Dudley, Mush, Morton. Morton's boat, USS Wahoo, had been the terror of Japanese shipping in early 1943. She'd sunk 19 ships in 5 patrols. Morton was the kind of hell-for-leather skipper who charged through escort screens, fired spreads from suicidal ranges, and then somehow backed out under a waterfall of depth charges, still laughing. In August 1943, he'd done something nobody else had dared yet, gone into the Sea of Japan through Tsushima Strait, hunted there for 2 weeks, and come back with proof that Hirohito's bathtub could be cracked. In October, trying to come out through La Perouse Strait to the north, he'd found the price of success. On the 11th, Japanese aircraft spotted Wahoo on the surface. Bombs splashed, destroyers closed. 40 bombs, 69 depth charges, slicks of oil and debris. 79 men, no survivors. Lockwood, ComSub-Pac, read the loss and wrote in his diary that night, "This is the worst blow we've had. I'm heartbroken." He never forgot that. He also never forgot what Morton had proven, that even supposedly safe waters weren't. By 1944, the Sea of Japan he slipped back into being a sanctuary for Japanese shipping. Mines and geography made it effectively untouchable by submarines. Convoys and single ships alike ran with minimal escort, and often with lights on, carrying coal and ore from Manchuria and Korea to the factories on Honshu. It would stay that way until June 1945, when Lockwood's Hellcats went in with their experimental sonar. In the meantime, Japanese boats were doing something similar in reverse across the Central Pacific. They called it a scouting line. About a week after England sank I-16, the 7th Submarine Squadron was going to discover what that felt like. On May 19, 1944, Fleet Radio Unit, Pacific, FRUPAC, intercepted and decoded a Japanese message. Submarine I-16 was heading to Buka, north of Bougainville. Her reported position, speed, and intended track gave Allied planners a precise slot of ocean and time. Perfect ambush bait. In Tulagi, in the Solomons, a small hunter-killer group formed around 3 destroyer escorts, USS England, USS George, and USS Raby. England was a Buckley-class DE, about 306 feet long, displaced just under 1,500 tons standard, armed with 3-inch guns, depth charges, K-guns, and, crucially, that 24-barrel Hedgehog launcher on her foredeck. Her skipper, Pendleton, had never sunk a submarine. His crew had never seen Hedgehog work in anger. On the night of the 18th, they took station athwart I-16's expected route north of Bougainville. At a 1:50 on the 19th, sonar got him. "Contact bearing 090, range 1,500 yards, the operator said. I-16's captain, hearing the distant echoes and perhaps catching a trace of enemy radar a bit earlier, did the standard Japanese thing, ordered a dive and began violent maneuvers. Pendleton, in England's Combat Information Center, leaned over the sonar plot. He knew the theory, knew what FRUPAC had said, knew full well that this could also be a freighter with a bad case of nerves. There was only one way to find out. He lined up his first Hedgehog run. The first pattern missed. 24 projectiles arced through the afternoon air and splashed into the Pacific 200 yards ahead. They sank invisibly, each angling slightly outward from the pattern's center, forming a ring of steel descending into the path of an invisible submarine. England steamed in behind them, her bow cutting the surface. The men in the sonar shack and the control room counted seconds in their heads. Nothing. They'd felt the faint clink through the hull before, in training, when a Hedgehog projectile struck bottom. No big splash, no big blast. Pendleton barely paused. Come around. Again. The second salvo produced a single sharp crack at about 130 feet. The boat shivered. But more silence followed. No debris or oil. Morton's ghost poked at the back of Pendleton's mind. I-16 was a big boat. She could take a glancing blow and live. The third pattern missed. The fathometer, which had been quiet while they concentrated on the sub, now came back with alarming numbers. Bottom at 325 feet. I-16 had gone deep, deeper than their last depth estimate. Her skipper was wringing every foot out of his boat to get below the predictable sweet spots for Hedgehog and depth charges alike. Fourth salvo. Nothing. In a lot of captains, frustration would have crept in. They'd be tempted to drop a full depth charge pattern just to shake things up. Pendleton kept his voice level. He altered the estimate again, kept listening to sonar, and ordered a fifth run. The fifth pattern was textbook. England ran in squarely on the target's bearing. Hedgehog launched. The bombs went in. Seconds later, 4 detonations in rapid sequence. Then 6 more, close enough that the overlapping shock waves rattled coffee cups in the wardroom. Then a bigger, deeper detonation. The unmistakable unzipping sound of a submarine's internal pressure equalizing with the OC, in the worst possible way. England's stern rose, then fell. This time, when the lookouts and officers peered into the slick of disturbed water, the proof came up fast. Oil, planking, insulation, bits of Japanese gear. I-16 was gone. 107 men with her. 5 Hedgehog attacks, 1 kill. 20% success rate versus the 5% early trials had shown. 4 times better than the test reports. 20 times better than depth charges. Enough to make believers of a very skeptical crew. They didn't know it yet, but FRUPAC had already queued up the next set of targets. The day after England sank I-16, FRUPAC at Pearl cracked another message. 7th Submarine Squadron had deployed 7 small RO-class submarines along a line designated NA. The boats, RO 104, 105, 106, 108, 109, 112, and 116, were set at carefully calculated intervals, stretching from the approaches to Truk down toward the waters west of Manus. Their mission wasn't glory. It was information. Detect American carrier forces heading for the Marianas or Palaus. Radio back positions. Be the eyes and early warning net for Admiral Soemu Toyoda's combined fleet. Functionally, they were the Japanese equivalent of the Atlantic U-boat scout lines that had given Allied convoys so much trouble. Now, with I-16 gone and the NA line's existence revealed, the Americans had a choice. They could route around it, or they could try to take the whole line apart. Commander Hamilton Haynes at Tulagi looked at the map and thought about what England had just done. He had 3 ships, England, George, and Raby, all built from the keel up as submarine hunters, all with sonar, radar, depth charges, and one with a newly proven Hedgehog team. The idea of 3 DEs against 7 submarines sounded ridiculous on the face of it. But odds don't work the same way at sea as they do on a chessboard. What mattered was who saw whom first, and who could turn that into a kill. Haynes requested and received orders to form Task Group 22.3, an independent hunter-killer team. On May 21st, they left Purvis Bay and headed west. The way you find a submerged submarine with a surface ship is not elegant. It's persistence and geometry. At night, the 3 escorts ran line abreast, 16,000 yards between them, about 8 nautical miles from wingtip to wingtip. Radar sets spun in steady rhythm, sweeping out for surfaced submarines risking a recharge. Before radar, sub-hunting at night had been half hope, half luck. Now, a boat that tried to take advantage of darkness could appear as a neat little pip at 10 or 12 miles. By day, with subs more likely to be down, sonar took over. Each ship's ASDIC sent out small pings at regular intervals. The returning echoes, if they hit a hull, sounded different from those off the bottom or thermal layers. On May 22nd, in the pre-dawn dark, England's radar operator saw a blip at about 9 miles. Small, alone. Pendleton ordered a turn to intercept. As they closed, the other two escorts turned as well, lagging 3 or 4 miles behind. At 0406, the contact vanished off radar. There was only one good reason for that. Submerged, England kept going. Then sonar got him. Contact, range 1,800 yards. RO-106's crew had spotted the DE's approach and crash-dived. Once under, their captain fell into the same playbook as I-16's. Zigzags, course alterations, changes of depth. It didn't help. Hedgehog run 1, miss. Run 2, hits. In 3 attacks, England put enough contact bombs into the water to break RO-106's back. Wreckage came up in the usual wave. Second submarine gone. Word went out to George and Raby over TBS. Sub sunk, debris sighted. We'll re-establish line once we've searched for survivors. There were none. The next day, May 23rd, the NA line blinked again. A U.S. patrol aircraft spotted a surfaced submarine in the approximate area of RO-104's assign, D station. The pilot made a bombing run. Near misses straddled the boat. The watch crew of the RO boat saw geysers rise and went down in a hurry. The pilot circled, saw the swirl of a diving wake, and called in a contact report with bearing and range. Task Group 22.3 moved. This time, George reached the scene first, with England close behind. Depth charge patterns and Hedgehog runs overlapped. Sonar echoes flickered and blurred under the strain. Somewhere down there, the Japanese skipper was doing his best to stay out of that deadly ring. Hedgehog pattern after pattern fell. Silent misses. Then finally, a solid salvo. RO-104 died under the combined weight of the 3 DEs, but it was England's Hedgehog that delivered the decisive blows. Third boat down. Numbers that looked insane on any planner's chart were suddenly reality. 3 submarines in 5 days. Each one a set of eyes removed from Toyoda's early warning net. RO-116 went the same way. On May 24th, while England's group zigzagged along the painted arc of the NA line, Raby's sonar picked up a faint contact off her bow. She vectored England in. First Hedgehog pattern, miss. Second, a set of small, satisfying cracks. Again, no oil geyser, no surface fireworks, just the solid, unmistakable sound of bombs meeting hull. When oil and debris came up, they added another pin to the ops plot at Tulagi. 4 subs now. I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116. FRUPAC's intercept of the original NA line message had never looked so valuable. The Japanese still didn't know exactly how their boats were dying, or that one small ship's strange forward-firing mortars were responsible for most of them. But fear was creeping in. RO-108 was found courtesy of air power. On May 26th, a patrol plane flying near the Admiralty spotted a surface submarine and dropped a stick of depth charges that forced her under. Pilot logged his position, saw no wreckage, and radioed the contact in. England and her sisters plotted course and speed, drew circles on the map, and went hunting. Again, it came down to sonar, patience, and a willingness to keep running patterns until either the sub got away or the bombs found steel. This time, it only took a couple of runs. 5th submarine down. 5 out of 7 in the line gone, all in just over a week. In many navies, that would have been a lifetime's worth of success. For Pendleton and his crew, it was now the new normal. They joked about it. Grim jokes, the way sailors do. On the mess decks, the crew hung 6 miniature Japanese flags under the Hedgehog mount, 1 for each confirmed kill. They also knew something else. The Japanese were adjusting. If any of those RO skippers had gotten off a burst transmission, if any lookouts had seen their comrades destroyed while surfaced, word would be filtering back up the chain of Japanese command. Next time, the tiny destroyers might not get to shoot first. Then, RO-105 came into their world. RO-105 was good. She'd been laid down in 1941, commissioned in 1943, and had survived long enough to accumulate experience and scars. By late May 1944, she and her sisters on the NA line were doing long stretches of mind-numbing, nerve-wracking patrol. Few sightings, constant readiness. When patrol planes from Manus attacked her on May 31st, her captain wasn't surprised. He took his boat under, rode out the explosions, and then began slow, careful moves to evade. What he couldn't have anticipated was the sheer persistence of the little hunter group coming down on his last contact position. England, George, Raby, and later reinforcements Spangler and Hazelwood spent the day after the air sighting combing the area. Faint sonar returns, ambiguous hydrophone noises, false contacts off thermal layers and odd bottom contours. Hours bled away. Most hunting groups would have given up, written the contact off as a probable damaged submarine that had crawled away or died. Pendleton and Haynes did not. By early afternoon, England regained solid contact. What followed was almost a textbook demonstration of what Hedgehog and good sonar could do, and of how hard a determined submarine could try to stay alive. England ran in and fired. Miss RO-105's captain twisted his boat through the pattern's gaps, listening for the distinct splashes of the projectiles, trying to judge their fall. Raby took a run. Missed depth charge patterns from George added more confusion to the water column. The hours ticked by. Tempers frayed. Fatigue crept in. Attack 5, 6, 7. Some produced near hits. A few detonations, some hope. And then nothing. No debris. No oil. No solid evidence of a kill. RO-105 might have been taking damage, losing speed, losing depth control, or she might simply have been skating just inside the margins of the Hedgehog patterns, living on seconds and feet. On the 12th attack run, with the sun already sliding toward the horizon, England fired another 24 projectile pattern. This time, the multiple sharp detonations and the follow-on deeper blast left no doubt. Oil slicked the surface. Bits of cork, bamboo, and human gear floated up. RO-105 was gone. The next morning's roll call on the Japanese side of the radio circuit would be shorter. Laughlin, one of England's petty officers, scratched another rising sun onto the Hedgehog mount. 6. It would be the last. In 12 days, from May 19th to May 31st, 1944, USS England had engaged and sunk the I-class submarine I-16. Killed RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, and RO-105, 5 of the 7 RO-class boats in the NA scouting line. Saved uncounted tonnage and men in future convoys and task groups by ripping Japan's eyes out along that approach. All with a hull 77 feet shorter and far lighter than a full destroyer's. A primary armament of 3-inch guns, a bow Hedgehog launcher, and racks and K-guns for depth charges. A crew of about 200 men who trusted their sonar operators and the cold math of an ugly stub-nosed weapon on the forecastle. In Tokyo, staff officers trying to keep track of submarine deployments in 1944 had more pressing disasters to track. Marianas, Aleutians, the crumbling perimeter. But the loss of so many patrol boats in one thread of the net was a warning they could ill afford to ignore. Their submarines were no longer hunters or even reliable scouts. They were becoming prey. In Washington and Pearl Harbor, the message was clearer. Destroyer escorts worked. Hedgehog worked. Code-breaking and radio direction finding, fused with aggressive surface sweeps, worked. The submarine war in the Pacific, and by extension, the effort to isolate Japan before the final blows, had just taken a leap forward. England would go on to other duties. Her 12-day run as a submarine killer would remain, on the record books, unmatched. Not by a task force, not by an air group, by a single, tiny destroyer escort that had done what mathematicians and weapons engineers promised it could do, and what a lot of old hands didn't believe any one ship could. Find an enemy designed to be invisible, and kill him again and again, until the line on the map was empty.